Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our live webinar. This webinar, we will discuss in detail on migrating Web Experience Factory portlets to open source platform. If you have any questions or if any trouble hearing or viewing the webinar at any point in time, please let us know in the question window. You can also post your question or any comments in the same window anytime during the presentation. I would also like to let everybody know that we have a dedicated slot to answer all of your questions that you might have towards the end of the presentation. I would like to begin the topic by a brief introduction about myself. My name is Adil Aslam, and I have over 12 years of work experience in full stack development. I'm a technology enthusiast and like to read and consume content on emerging technology, framework, processes, and the emergence of the cloud technology. Apart from work, I like to read books and go for hiking. I think that's enough about me. So we're gonna get into the core of this topic today. We would start our discussion about brief introduction about Royal Cyber. Then we will do a quick introduction about Web Experience based Factory portlets. That what exactly Web Experience Factory tool does and offer. What are what are all its limitations and costs involved for organizations who are already built-in assets based on this tool, and what are the best practices for successfully migrating web experience-based factory portlets to open source technology. And in the end, we will have a question and answer session too. So let's start our discussion with a brief introduction about who we are. So Royal Cyber is an IT consulting and digital transformation company specialization in services, solution, and software. We have been innovating since 2002 and have over 1,000 employees with over 600 happy customers worldwide. Across the globe, Royal Cyber provides reliable and high-performance solution and services in portals, commerce, cloud, analytics, mobile AI, and middleware integration. We're headquartered in Naperville, Illinois, and we have offices located in different parts of the world, namely Canada, Mexico, Australia, UK, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and we have delivery centers located in India. We design strategies to modernize, expand, and build value, delivering impactful journey for our clients and creating 360-degree value across their digital transformation journey. So we will start with Web Experience Factory background. So before we actually go into the details on the migration of the Web Experience Factory portlets, I would like to first cover some introduction and the background of Web Experience Factory tool itself. How was it emerged and what was the rationale and what was it built around? So Web Experience Factory is a portlet development technology originally developed by a company called Bow Street. The objective of the tool was simple: to achieve rapid portlet development with with minimum Java knowledge. So back in the days before this tool was even incepted, the traditional way for portlet-based development was using the native way of JSR 168 and 286 portlet. So the product idea was so good and striking at a level that back in those days, IBM had a product called WebSphere Portal. So the idea was so striking and appealing to IBM that they eventually end up buying this company, and later on they were the original owner of the product. So Web Experience Factory enable the model-based development approach for the portlets, in contrast to the traditional custom portlet development using JSR 168 or 286 standard. So the concept was, so instead of developer writing typical custom Java and portlet tag, developers in an organization which use web rather interacts mostly uh, with the web experience factory models and builders within it. So it's the web experience factory behind the scene. It uses the model based development approach. So it's a low code approach tool. So the concept was the developer will work with the web experience factory models and builders, and they will perform all their development. And whenever upon their saving the models and builder, there used to be a process called factory generation method, which runs behind the scene, which used to build the actual JSR 286 portlet code automatically. So what the customers were getting, their developers were interacting with Web Experience Factory, doing the portlet-based development through model-based approach rather than writing traditional Java code. And Web Experience Factory was automatically generating the backend code for them. So this was all cool up till back then, but later, as and when companies starting investing more in it, uh, enterprises realize that there are various problems and challenges with this solution. That everybody was realizing that as and more enterprises started invested in it heavily, there were a couple of various issues that were identified. So number one, as an enterprise keep scaling their application using Web Experience Factory, they were not realizing that they are getting deeper and deeper into the portlet-based implementation. So what it means is that what Web Experience Factory-based portlet does is it limits an ability of an organization or your application to be specifically hosted within WebSphere portlet-based solution. So these two fundamental issues that restricts any organization with future scalability and restrict your application implementation to the native portlet containers only. So the typical web experience factory implementation is very, if you look at it, a typical web experience factory implementation is very tightly coupled in nature. And in terms, I mean, what I mean by tightly coupled is your portlet views, business logic, and data access logic are all bundled up and housed within the web experience factory model. Okay. So a standard web implementation, and the another issue was a standard web implementation requires a very unique skill set. So based on all of this experience, that one, it's very tightly coupled. Two, whatever portlets are developed, these solutions are only restricted to native portlet containers only, which means in this case, I mean, enterprises who are running WebSphere portal, their solutions are limited to WebSphere portal only. They cannot house their solution anywhere else. So the what we are offering over here is uh, based on our research, what we have come up with a strategy where we are helping our customers to migrate their existing web experience factory implementation to open source technology. And we want to walk through this concept and idea and share this vision that how a typical web experience factory based implementation can be migrated into any open source technology. So as you can see in this example, in a given organization who is already deeply invested in web experience factory portlets, this is how a typical implementation will look like. They will have their web experience factory model, and within the model, their UI, their business logic, and their data access layer, they are all integrated within the same model. So all of the Java code, builder, your view components like your HTML and CSS, there may be some link Java objects. They all are bundled into the same component. So a typical migration will look like is we would have to identify in your existing web experience factory model all the UI components and extract them into a separate web layer. So similarly, what we got to do is identify all the server side or business side component and put them into a separate business layer. And likewise, and all your data access components can be extracted out and put it into a separate data access layer component. And these all components can be independent of each other, and they can interact with each other through REST API. So this is at a high level, very high level, how a typical migration strategy from a web experience factory model to an open source technology will look like. So going further, let's see how a typical portlet, a web experience factory portlet based implementation look like. So usually every project has a portlet layer. And as you can see over here, this is a typical web experience factory implementation. On your left, you see all the builders are added into this portlet model. And on the right side, you have the builders open. So, so this is your portlet layer, and within this portlet layer, you have multiple UI components and server-side components. So the another component of a typical architecture is the service layer. So a typical service layer within the web experience factory has all the builders related to server-side components, like your service operation, your SQL calls, your action list, and the list goes on. So this is how a typical web experience based factory solution will look like. Usually, we will have a portlet layer, which is the front or the view part, which communicate with the backend service layer, and both are built on web experience factory. And the service layer is responsible for interacting with the data layer. So it could be either your database, your integration bus, your APIs, or whatever. So, so this is how a typical migration will look like. So let's say we will begin with the portlet layer. We would identify all the UI component builders. Once we identify the UI component builder, we're going to extract them out into a separate UI project. So we will end up creating a new web project, extract all the UI components in it, and so that project will only have HTML, CSS, and Angular in it. So likewise, once this is done, what can be done is we're going to sit in the same way, we're going to identify all the server-side components and put them into a separate Spring Boot project. The reason why we are picking the Spring Boot project is because they are very lightweight and they support cloud-based application development. So in the same way, So with this thing, your portlet layer will be done. We're going to use the same practice for the service layer too. In service layer, a typical service layer usually just has server-side components. So we're going to identify the component and migrate them to the Spring Boot project. The reason for having a separate broker layer and the DAO layer is to separate the business logic and your persistence logic. So this your broker service project will house all your business logic, and your DAO service project will house all your data persistence logic. So with both portlet and service layer being migrated to their own independent Spring Boot project, then we're gonna have finally the data layer, which can remain as is. And these all three components can interact with each other through REST APIs. So what we have achieved over here is we have extracted out the various components built in very deeply within Web Experience Factory into an open source project. So we have a separate UI project, independent UI project. Then we have a separate backend services for business logic, and we have a backend services for your data access related logic, and they will be interacting with each other through REST API. So that's how what we will end up with. So this is a summary that we will have a front end layer extracted out from your Web Experience Factory portlet, and we will have a separate broker project which will be housing all your business logic, and this same has been extracted out of your portlet level where all the business logic was implemented. Similarly, for the service layer, also we will extract out all the logic into the DAO project, and we will have the data layer, which will be responsible providing all the data, and all of the components will be interacting with each other through REST API. So I hope it makes sense. What we are trying to, what we, with this approach, what we will end up with is we started with a typical Web Experience Factory based portlet. And what we end up with by doing all this migration journey, by extracting out, we end up with three independent projects: the front end project, the business layer Spring Boot project, and the backend DAO data access object project. And so once we have these three components developed, this is something that can be hosted on either on any on-prem solution, and they will be fully capable or capable of deploying into any cloud solution too. So, so this is all in all what we have. I hope this entire journey and migration strategy makes sense. Uh, so, so, so with that thing, with this thing, this thing is covered. I would like now to give everybody of you to give you an opportunity. If you guys have any question, you guys may ask. Okay, I have a question. Somebody has asked, like, how much time does Royal Cyber take to completely migrate? So it's a very good question. So the answer is it depends on how complex your environment is. So ideally, it takes 3 to 4 months. But if depending on the size of the application, this may vary. Okay. With that, I don't see any more questions coming in. If you have any questions, feel free to write us at email. It will be info@royalcyber.com. We will be happy to help you out. Thank you once again for taking time and attending our webinar. We look forward to seeing you in our future webinars. Thank you.